Hi, this is Corey Franklin with Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. And we're going to start out the show tonight with Barry Becher. Barry Becher died recently at the age of 71, and he was the man behind the Ginsu Knife. The Ginsu Knife was that sharp Japanese knife that could cut through anything, leather, shoes, with samurai-like precision. The only problem is they were made in Ohio. That was the genius that Barry Becher brought to television advertising. He was a nice Jewish boy born in Brooklyn, and he teamed up with a nice Catholic boy, Ed Valenti, and they sold Ginsu knives on television on commercials that were the forerunner of the infomercial and ultimately the shopping channel. Everybody's seen one of those Ginsu knife commercials, generally late at night. Here's a little bit of one with their stock phrase, but wait, there's much, much more.
In Japan, the hand can be used like a knife. But this method doesn't work with a tomato. That's why we use the Ginsu. It's a knife that no kitchen should be without. The Ginsu can cut a slice of bread so thin you can almost see through it. It cuts meat better than an electric knife and goes through frozen food as though it were melted butter. The Ginsu is so sharp it can cut through a tin can and still slice a tomato like this. It can chop wood and still remain razor sharp. What's more, it's a knife that will last forever. How much would you pay for a knife like this? Before you answer, listen. It even comes with a matching fork to make carving a pleasure. Wait, there's much, much more. We also want you to have this 6-in-1 kitchen tool.
Yeah, another minute on TV, they're going to sell you all sorts of stuff for only $9.95. But those commercials are seared into people's consciousness, and they introduced Americans to a new level of television advertising. Everybody used to make fun of them. Saturday Night Live did. Jerry Seinfeld did routines on it. Here's a Jerry Seinfeld routine where he's talking with Johnny Carson about buying a set of Ginsu knives.
I actually, in fact, recently bought the Ginsu knife. I wish that I was saying that just to set up as a joke, but I actually bought the Ginsu knife. I was watching TV late at night. How long has this commercial been on? It's got to be 20 years, right?
Something like that.
Got to be 20 years. I'm sitting there, and it's late, you're getting drowsy, and he's cutting through the shoe with the thing, and
a can.
Cutting through the can. I'm going, that looks pretty good. Cut through the shoe, cut through the can. I need that knife, So I call up the lady, and they dial the number there. I said, I'd like to order the Ginsu knife. And the lady on the other end of the phone, she says, really? I said, yes. They sent me the knife. They apparently the Ginsu people themselves can't believe anyone would even, they got 3 left, and they just keep running the thing, trying to get rid of the last 3 of them. And I got the thing, and it's great, but you start thinking, if you need a knife that can cut through a shoe, maybe you're not buying the highest grade of meat currently available,
You gotta move into prime.
Yeah, maybe they'll pass on the hoof cut once in a while, get something a little better.
Well, we have Barry Becher to thank for the Ginsu knife, and supposedly his family was contemplating putting, wait, there's much, much more on his tombstone. I don't know if that's true or not, but he was a landmark advertiser, and we'll miss him. We're going to turn now to Ernest Borgnine, who died recently at the age of 95, and we're not going to go into his self-stated reason for why he lived so long. That's available on YouTube or on Google, and pretty interesting, and I advise you to check it out, but that's for another day. Ernest Borgnine was one of the great actors of our generation, and he was a contradiction in terms. He was not a great-looking man who became a movie star. He was a movie star who gravitated to television and got his most famous role in television. In his films, he generally played a bad guy, and yet in real life, he was one of the nicest guys around. So we lost a great actor in Ernest Borgnine. We'll trace a little bit of his career because he played opposite some of the great actors of our generation, and he generally acquitted himself quite well. Ernest Borgnine was a nice Italian boy from Connecticut, and I'll let him tell you how he got into the acting profession.
It all started with a question. Have you ever thought of becoming an actor? When I came home from World War II, my mother asked me, have you ever thought of becoming an actor? You always wanted to be an arlecchino, a clown in front of people. Well, I went ahead and became an actor.
Well, that's quite an understatement. Ernest Borgnine started out in local theater. He did some early television, some nondescript movies, and then he moved on to 3 of the greatest movies of the 1950s, where he played a central role in each one of them. As a young actor, he got his big break in one of the great classics of the 1950s, From Here to Eternity. That's the movie that rejuvenated Frank Sinatra's career. Ernest Borgnine played Fatso Judson, the sadistic stockade sergeant, who beats Frank Sinatra to death. But before he beats him to death, they have a famous barroom scene. And Ernest Borgnine was superb in this scene. And in this scene, there's also Burt Lancaster, who breaks up the fight between Sinatra and Borgnine. And also in the scene, not speaking anything, is Montgomery Clift. Now, you know, when you're with Burt Lancaster, Frank Sinatra, and Montgomery Clift, and you're a young actor, and you steal the scene, you've got some talent.
Who's the broad?
Right there. You hit me.
Yeah, and I'm about to do it again, too.
Oh, you dirty wop.
If you don't want to fight, take it outside.
I'm gonna cut this wop's heart out. Anybody steps in here, I give it to him first.
One step further, Fatso, and I'm gonna debrain you.
Nobody's going to do nothing. Anybody does any killing around here, I'll do it.
This is a private affair, Warden.
No, it ain't. This man's in my company. And you ain't making 2 extra weeks paperwork for me for nothing. Out for blood, huh? You'd puke your guts out at the sight of a dead man. Put down that stool. Put it down. Okay, Fatso. If it's killing you want, come on. Well, come on. On the floor. Kill us, huh? I'd trade the Claria for a good campfire, you know.
Tough monkey. Guys like you end up in the stockade sooner or later. Someday you walk in, I'll be waiting. I'll show you a couple of things.
Ernest Borgnine was on his way with that role. 2 years later, in 1955, he had a big year. Again, 2 of the great movies of the 50s. One of them was A Bad Day at Black Rock with Spencer Tracy and Robert Ryan. And Ernest Borgnine plays one of the bad guys who's trying to cover up the murder of a Japanese farmer. Again, he's a young actor with Tracy and Ryan, and he more than holds his own in this diner scene where he attempts to intimidate Spencer Tracy.
This stool ain't comfortable.
I was afraid of that.
I think I'd like the one you're on.
He's as changeable as a prairie fire.
Suppose you tell me what to say.
I hope that ain't too much.
Your friend's a very argumentative fellow. Sort of unpredictable, too. Got a temper like a rattlesnake.
That's me all over. I'm half horse, half alligator. You mess with me and I'll kick a lung out of you. What do you think of that?
No comment.
You know, talking to you is like pulling teeth. You wear me out. You're a yellow-bellied chaplain, am I right or wrong?
You're not only wrong, you're wrong at the top of your voice.
You don't like my voice?
I think your friend is trying to start trouble.
Darn right he was trying to start trouble, Spencer. Here's Ernest Borgnine talking about the first time he met Spencer Tracy on the set. Spencer Tracy was then a legend.
He gets out of the car and starts toward me. And all I could see were 2 Academy Awards coming right to me. I forgot my name, I forgot the score, I forgot everything.
Well, Spencer Tracy had 2 Academy Awards, but Ernest Borgnine was to win his own Academy Award that year. In the other classic movie of the 1950s, Marty, Ernest Borgnine was to become synonymous with that role. Apparently, Burt Lancaster liked what he saw in From Here to Eternity, and he cast Ernest Borgnine as a nice guy here, a lovelorn 34-year-old Italian butcher who can't get a date until he meets Betsy Blair.
Hello, I'm Burt Lancaster. Back visiting my old hometown, New York City. Recognize that fellow? His name is Marty. Never heard of him, hmm? Well, you will, because we made a picture about him. No, I'm not in it. It's all his. Harold Hecht and I produced this picture. Patty Chayefsky wrote it, and Delbert Mann directed it. And talk about stars being born. The performances of Ernie Borgnine and Betsy Blair make me proud to be an actor.
Patty Chayefsky was writing a lot of stuff back in those days. You'll remember a couple of weeks back when we talked about how he wrote A Face in the Crowd for Andy Griffith. Here is a scene from Marty with Ernest Borgnine and his mother.
Well, Marty, put on the blue suit, huh?
Blue suit, gray suit. I'm just a fat little man, a fat, ugly man.
You not ugly.
I'm ugly, I'm ugly, I'm ugly.
Marty.
Ma, leave me alone!
And then, of course, one of the most famous scenes in movies from Marty. And we played this when Joe Montell died last year. Joe Montell also did the famous line in Chinatown, "It's Chinatown, Jake." It's not every day we get to play the same clip for 2 different shows.
Oh, what do you feel like doing tonight? I don't know, Edge. What do you feel like doing? We're back to that, huh?
That's famous stuff for you young people out there. To let you know how improbable it was that Marty should become a big hit, a couple years later, Jackie Gleason had a bomb show on television, and he went on television to explain how bad it was and the vicissitudes of show business. And what example did he use to say you could never predict? Well, he used Marty. Here he is.
Let me explain this to you. The facts of show business are this. Show business is a very strange and intangible endeavor. Now, for instance, put yourself in the place of a bank president. Now, suppose a guy walked into you and you were the president of a bank, and he said to you, I want to borrow $1 million because I'm going to put on a picture with no stars in it. He said, and the plot of the picture is this: an ugly butcher up in the Bronx can't get a date, and it's going to win the Academy Award. Well, immediately, you step on the emergency bell, and you hermetically seal the whole bank, and in 30 seconds, Bellevue is there with the straitjackets akimbo, But oddly enough, there was a guy who did borrow some money from a bank, who did put on a picture without any stars in it, and it was about an ugly butcher in the Bronx who couldn't find a date, and the name of the picture was Marty. Now, up to now, it's made about $8 million. So how can you tell,
$8 million was a lot of money for a picture to make back then, and indeed, how could you tell? But that's the movie that made Ernest Borgnine a star. Here's how good an actor Ernest Borgnine was. Here was his competition for the Academy Awards that year, and reading the nominees in the award is Grace Kelly.
James Cagney, James Dean, Frank Sinatra, Spencer Tracy. The winner is Ernest Borgnine.
You got to be pretty good to beat those guys. The interesting thing is, after that, Ernest Borgnine's career sort of went into a tailspin for a couple of years, and he was rescued by the same thing that rescued other people like Fred MacMurray and Andy Griffith. Remember, you had all these bad guys from the 40s and 50s, and what rescued them? More benign sitcom characters in the 60s. And Ernest Borgnine's character in the 60s was Quentin McHale and McHale's Navy, which most people know him for. Here he talks about how he got the role on McHale's Navy.
Man said, hey, why not put this fella with a bunch of fellas with a PT boat over on an island and do this, that, and the other, and it all came out as McHale's Navy. Now they called me up, and they said, we'd like you to do, we love the water, you spent 10 years in the Navy and all that. Would you like to do this? And yeah, it'd be nice, but I said, no, I'm a motion picture actor now, I don't do television anymore. I said, well, if you change your mind, please, we want to get started as soon as possible. Let us know. Just, think about it. Okay. The good Lord would have it. A young man came to the door the next morning selling chocolate bars for some school that wanted to put up a building or something. And he said, would you like to? Sure. I said, how much are they? And I was digging for the money. He said, mister, you look awfully familiar. What's your name? I said, my name is James Arness. He said, no, he does Gunsmoke. I said, no, my name is really Richard Boone. No, he does Have Gun Will Travel. I said, son of a gun. This kid knows them all. And all you have to do look around the door, and there's the Oscar, the whole bit. I had him up, and I said, I'll tell him my name, and I'm sure he'll know. My name is Ernest Borgnine. Zilch. He said, I know, I've seen you somewhere. I said, thank you, son, here's your money. Thank you very much. Took my chocolate bars, went inside. Called up my agent. I said, that part's still open? And he said, yes. I said, okay, I'll do it. He said, what changed your mind? I said, none of your damn business. A year later, almost to the date, after we had done McHale, I'm way up in Oregon looking for some place to stay for the night. And I opened the door to this cottage, an office, and the fellow took one look. He said, McHale! Whoa! I said, boy, that kid was right.
That's the early influence of television in the late 1950s and early 1960s. And here Borgnine talks about it.
What television can do is an amazing thing. You can be a very, very important motion picture actor. But boy, if you got it made on television, you can go all over the world, believe me, in a hurry. And people take you to their heart if they like you, And McHale, my God, I owned Australia. It was on for 4 seasons. We did 148 of them in 4 seasons' time. Because in those days, we used to do 39 a year.
Here's Ernest Borgnine in McHale's Navy with 2 great comedians who were on that show. An early Tim Conway, that's where Tim Conway got his big break, and Carl Ballantine, who was a very funny guy.
In the meantime, we'll have the boat waiting at the beach. We can shove off before Binghamton has a chance to get wise.
Hey, yeah,
It's gotta work. It's gotta work, boys. Now look, the rest of you guys come with me. And sweetheart, oh baby, give it all you got. Come on, let's go.
Hey, how am I going to pick up that person? The captain will spot me.
Wow. I'll think of something.
McHale's Navy was a good show. Actually, Ernest Borgnine got a couple of great movie roles in the 1960s. One of them was in Sam Peckinpah's The Wild Bunch, one of the first violent classic westerns of the 1960s. He's a violent bad guy teamed with Robert Ryan again.
I'd like to say a few words for the dear dead departed, and maybe a few hymns would be in order, followed by a church supper with a choir.
And he's also in that great badass 1960s military film, The Dirty Dozen, where he plays opposite one of my main men, Lee Marvin.
Now you hold it right there. This war was not started for your private gratification, and you can be damn sure that this army isn't being run for your personal convenience either.
Yeah, Lee Marvin just looks at him there. Lee Marvin was a badass also. In the 70s, he played in The Poseidon Adventure and some other not-so-great movies. And late in the 70s, he got on television again in Airwolf, which was some dreck about a rescue helicopter, sort of the stuff they were doing in the late 70s. Wasn't great television, but he gave it his all. Here's a theme from Airwolf. Yeah, that theme music just says late 70s all over it. Anyway, he did some more movies and television, but he became known to a young generation through his voiceover work, most notably in SpongeBob SquarePants. And here he talks about his voiceover work in SpongeBob SquarePants.
I had given a speech one time over at the press club in Washington. So I went in and I did my thing, you know. When I finished the thing, everybody politely, you know, applauded, and it was very good, and thank you. And there's a little bunch of Girl Scouts out there that bought a lot of cookies for the boys in Iraq. Would you mind saying hello? No, not at all. So I walked out there, and as I'm walking out, this lady is saying, and you know, this man has made a lot of pictures and done this and done that. And I said, how many of you have seen my pictures? They all looked at me and said, nothing. Zilch. Suddenly I had a brainstorm. I said, how many of you know SpongeBob? Yes! I said, well, I happen to play Mermaid Man. I was in. They came around, they took pictures, they couldn't get enough of me, you know? And then, of course, I had to give them the email, and that was it. And how it all started, I don't know. My voice cracked when I was giving that email, you know? And I said, by golly, we start something. And we kept it in. And so everybody, you know, do it. I said, email.
Yeah, that's the same badass who stared down Frank Sinatra, Lee Marvin, and Spencer Tracy. He was really a nice guy. Normally I don't go into their private lives very much, but he was married 4 times, and the notable marriage was to the belter Broadway Ethel Merman.
Anything you can do, I can do better. I can do anything better than you.
No, you can't.
Yes, I can.
No, you can't.
Yes, I can.
No, you can't.
Yes, I can. Yes, I can.
Geez, I don't know. For some strange reason, they were only married for 34 days. In her autobiography, Ethel Merman says, my marriage to Ernest Borgnine, and then a blank page. She says it was because she was more famous than him and he couldn't handle it, but I have a feeling because they were married in the 60s and McHale's Navy was on, it may have been the other way around. She was on the downside of her career. In any event, they had the famous 34-day marriage. So that's Ernest Borgnine's career, a wonderful career. We're glad we got to see those films and those TV shows and got his personality for so long. He was a wonderful talent. I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer, Sid Tepps, and our closing music tonight is, what else? The theme from McHale's Navy. This is McHale's Navy's March, and like so many theme songs from the 1960s, it was written by a master. It was written by Axel Stordahl, who was a composer and arranger for Tommy Dorsey, and was Frank Sinatra's main man at Capitol in the 1950s. So take it away, PT-73.